Helen.
There we go. Welcome, everyone. I'm pretty excited. Tonight is another first for Powher Books, and you'll see me look around to the side because we're going live on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. And Instagram is difficult because it wants you to go live on Instagram only. It does not work with anything else. So therefore I have another device, and so sometimes I will look to the side because, well, there are people on Instagram hopefully watching us. But welcome, welcome. It's our first Powher Books preview, and we're very excited tonight. We're going to be talking about 4 wonderful books, and I will read a bit from each of those books and hopefully not bore you all to tears. But I think they're really great books, and I think that you're going to agree with me. So just before we get out the gate, I want to just have a couple of little reminders. I want to say happy anniversary to Powher Books. Powher Books is 1 year old today, March
Yay.
8th, International Women's Day. Yay! We launched last year as an online independent Black woman-owned bookstore last year on March 8th. And we are so excited to be doing this tonight as another first. We're going to each month come to you with new books and exciting new books that I have read or am in the midst of reading, and I'll share with you as you sip on some sort of libation and maybe have a snack and hopefully relax after work and a long day or whatever it was that you were doing today, and you get to relax. And there just is nothing like exploring a book, right? New books are the most wonderful, and we're used to going into the bookstore and sitting down and lounging and reading the book, and well, it's an online bookstore, so this is the best I can do, and I hope you enjoy it. Across the bottom of my screen, or your screen, our screen, is the link to the website, powherbooks.com/shop, where all of these books are available that we'll be talking about tonight. So if you just can't wait to get it in your hot little hand, you can actually order it. And also there's a link to our Ko-Fi website. And I'll just tell you very briefly, as an independent bookseller, we find ourselves in need of support from our patrons, not just to buy books, but also to share and like all our social media posts, and to give if they can, contribute if they can to our operations fund. And Ko-Fi helps us do that. So the link is there for Ko-Fi. It's Ko-Fi, ko-fi.com/Powher Books, and you can go there and you can contribute as you feel inclined to do so. Also, if you are a woman-owned business, we have some sponsorship slots available. So take a look at that, and if you want to participate in that, we welcome that. And I'm gonna start. The first book. The first book I don't have a physical copy of. I have an ebook on the first one, so I'm going to actually read a portion of it from my phone. And but I want to tell you, the book is called The Vanishing Half, and it's written by Britt Bennett. It topped several bestseller lists. In fact, it was Barack Obama. It was on Barack Obama's list of favorite books of the year in 2020. It was a New York Times bestseller. It was a 2021 Women's Prize finalist. It is really it has gotten over the years great reviews. And also, I believe that Britt Bennett has gotten herself a deal, right, to do a limited series on the book. So I'm not sure, I can't remember which outlet or platform it's going to be on, but it will definitely be on. So keep your eyes peeled for it. It was also named a Best Book of the Year by the Washington Post, NPR, People, Time Magazine, Vanity Fair, and Glamour. So it's got big hype. For myself, I started reading it, and I think it's a really awesome book. It is layered. It is, I think, in some ways, a writer's book because there's lots of layers to the stories that are being told. And it's really a feat to be able to do these things simultaneously. So kudos to Britt Bennett. Maybe one day we'll get her on and have her do an author takeover, or we'll do an interview with her. But I'm going to read a little bit from the book right now. Let me just pull it up for you right now. And let's see, where is my Kindle? Where did you go? You know, you never can find these things when you want them. If I wasn't looking, it would be right in front of me. Where is it? Oh, there it is. Okay. All right. So, I wanted to show you the cover. Let's see if I can get it. I don't know if I can get it big enough. But the cover is really, the cover almost got as much kudos as the book itself. Let's see if I can find it really quickly. Where are you, cover? Hang in there with me. Live. It's like live radio, live TV. There's no pauses. You just keep talking until you find what you're looking for. Okay, here we go. Cover. Okay, so that's the cover. It looks a little purpley on the screen to me, but can you see it? Does it look good? This is the cover. Everybody was hyping about the cover as much as they were hyping about the book. So The Vanishing Half is about twins. It's about twins, and it's about their lives and then how their lives impact the lives of their own children, right? So we're going to start, I'm going to read you a bit from chapter 3. Obviously, I don't want to give away the whole book, but something important happens in chapter 3, and I think it's a good place for us to start. So, leaving Mallard was Desiree's idea, but staying in New Orleans was Stella's. And for years, Desiree would puzzle over why. When the twins first arrived in the city, they found work together in the mangle room at Dixie's Laundry, folding sheets and pillowcases for $2 a day. At first, the smell of clean laundry reminded Desiree so much of home, she nearly cried. They've gone away, they've run away, and they've left their mom, and they've left their small town that they were born and raised in, and they've left everything they know. The rest of the city was filthy, urine-splattered cobblestone, garbage cans overflowing onto the streets, and even the drinking water tasting metallic. It was the Mississippi River, May, their shift supervisor, said. Who knew what they dumped in there? She was born and raised in Kenner, not far out of the city, so she was amused to witness the twins' disorienting welcome. When they'd appeared at Dixie Laundry one morning, breathless and late after the annoyed streetcar driver left them fumbling for change on the curb, May pitied those poor country girls. She hired them on the spot, even though they were underage. Your tale, not mine, she said. When the inspectors came, always by surprise, she rang the lunch bell 4 times, and the other laundry girls laughed as the twins darted into the bathroom until the inspection was over. Later, when she remembered Dixie Laundry, Desiree only pictured herself balancing on the toilet lid, pressed hard against Stella's back. She hated working like this, always looking over her shoulder, but what else could she do? I don't care how many toilets I get to jump in, she said. I ain't going back to Mallard. She was willful enough to make declarations like this. In truth, she wasn't so sure. She still felt guilty about leaving their mother. Stella told Desiree that she couldn't be mad at them forever. When they found better jobs, they'd start sending money home, and Mama would see that leaving was the kindest thing they could have done. For a moment, the thought assuaged her guilt, and Desiree felt so relieved. She didn't even find it strange that the Stella she'd dragged to New Orleans seemed intent on staying. Had Stella begun to change already? No, that came later. Back then, in the beginning anyway, she was the same Stella she had always been, fastidious at work, stacking crisp pillowcases quietly, while Desiree always drifted toward the gossiping girls planning nights out. Stella tracking each penny they both earned, Stella sleeping beside her, still occasionally caught in nightmares until Desiree gently nudged her awake. As the weeks turned into months, their sudden jaunt into the city began to feel more permanent. The thought was thrilling and terrifying. They could do this foolish thing, and if so, then what? What could they not do? The first year is the hardest, Farrah Thibodeau told them. You do a year, make it. For the first month, the twins slept on a pile of blankets on Farrah's floor. They'd looked her up in the phone book when they arrived in the city, bleary-eyed and bedraggled and hungry. Farrah leaned against the doorway, laughing at the sight of them. She laughed at them often, like when they gawked at burlesque dancers posing in club windows, or jolted away from drunk bums lurching down the sidewalk, or seemed every bit like two country girls who'd never been anywhere. These are my twins, she always said, introducing them to her friends, and Desiree only felt embarrassed, her own awkwardness multiplied by her sister's. Farrah waited tables at a little jazz club called the Grace Note. On nights she closed, she snuck the twins in through the alley and smuggled them food from the kitchen. Her Dominican boyfriend played the saxophone and wore a shiny silver shirt unbuttoned to his navel. In between songs, he hung over the stage asking the twins what they wanted to hear. Then the twins spent the night on the dance floor, giddy, twirled by big-eared boys. They started to befriend the regulars. A shoeshine boy who danced with Desiree until her feet ached. A soldier who kept begging to buy Stella drinks. A bellhop at Hotel Monteleone who always let Desiree blow his whistle to hail cabs. I bet you're not thinking about Mallard now, Farrah said one night as the twins skittered, laughing and tired, onto the back seat. Desiree laughed. Never, she said. She was good at pretending to be brave. She would never admit to Farrah that she was homesick and worried always about money. Soon Farrah would tire of the twins sprawling out on her floor, taking up time in her bathroom, eating her food, always being around, and unwanted guests doubled. Then what? Where would they be? Maybe they were just silly country girls in over their heads. Maybe Desiree was foolish to ever believe she could be more than that. Maybe they should just go back home. But you've been talking about coming out here forever, Stella said. You want to go back already? For what? So everyone can laugh at you? Only later Desiree realized that each time she'd wavered, Stella had known exactly what to say to dissuade her from returning home. But if Stella herself wanted to stay, why hadn't she just said so? Why hadn't Desiree even asked? She was 16 and self-centered, terrified that her impulsiveness would land her and her sister out on the streets. I shouldn't have brought you, she said. I should have just left alone. Stella looked as shocked as if Desiree had struck her. You wouldn't, she said, like it had suddenly become a possibility. No, Desiree said, but I should have. I shouldn't have dragged you into this. This was how Desiree thought of herself then. The single dynamic force in Stella's life, a gust of wind strong enough to rip out her roots. This was the story Desiree needed to tell herself, and Stella allowed her to. They both felt safe inside it. By the end of Desiree Vignes' first week back in Mallard, everyone had already heard about the shove, which by then had become a slap, punch, or even a full-out brawl. the Vignez girl dragged, kicking and screaming, out of the bar. Those not too holy to admit that they'd been at the Surly Goat that afternoon and that they'd seen her leave of her own volition right after she attacked the dark man. Who was he, and what had he said to anger her? Some thought he may have been her husband, come to fetch her. Others argued that he was a stranger who'd gotten fresh. She was just defending herself. Desiree had always been the prideful one. Of course, she'd lash out when wounded, unlike Stella, who'd rather die than make a scene. At the barber shop, Percy Wilkins slowly scraped his razor against the leather strap, listening to the men debate which twin had been the prettiest. In hindsight, Stella became more exotic, all the more beautiful now that she disappeared. But Desiree's stock rose since she'd come home. Still a firecracker, anyone could see that. At least 3 men joked that she could shove them around all she wanted. So just to backtrack just a tiny bit, the scene jumped from when Stella and Desiree were in New Orleans back to forward to when Desiree returned home to Mallard, which is the small town they came from. And this is something that Britt Bennett does throughout the book, and she does it very well, perhaps not illustrated by my reading of it, but she does it very well, jumping back and forth through time and showing us what happened. There's somebody who wants to join us, and I'm trying to let them. Technology. Well, I don't know. It's not working for some weird reason. But it, oh, okay, she's in there. Okay. So it's really an interesting thing that she does as she goes forth through time. And as she weaves the story of the twins with the story of their children in the future. And we're not going to read that far into it, but she deals with a lot of different subjects in this book. She deals with colorism. She deals with racism. She deals with domestic violence. The town of Mallard is a town of mulattoes. Everyone looks as if they could be white, but they're not. They're not considered white in the United States anyway. And so these girls go out into the world, into a place very different from where they were raised. And they get to see all these things and get in all this trouble and decide things that they're going to do. Desiree gets married and has a child, and Stella disappears, becoming one of the vanishing halves. One of the other things I really like about this book is that the vanishing halves reappear through the book. There are different vanishing halves as you go through the story. And anybody want to hear more of it or have questions about it? Any thoughts on it so far? I'm going to pick this up and it's going to look weird, but there's one person who's trying to get in live, and I want to just see if I can get them in. So excuse me while I play with technology. 1 second. But any questions anybody have? Okay. It looks like it's weird because it looks like she's in, but then it looks like she's not. I don't know. Anyway, Ida, can you hear us? Raise your hand. Wave a flag. Let us see you. All right. So that is a bit of the story of The Vanishing Half. Again, it is one of the books in inventory. So if that little tidbit brought you into the story, then please be sure to add it to your collection. I really like it, and it's a really good and sort of intense read. This brings us to number 2, book number 2. Book number 2, which I have an actual physical copy of, is Nikki Giovanni, world-renowned poet who really needs no introduction. Nikki Giovanni's book, and it's called A Good Cry. A Good Cry. And I've marked off some poems to share with you from the book. She wrote this, let's see when this was published, just a second here. This was published in 2017. And Nikki Giovanni is just, she's quite the wordsmith. I really love her work. And I hope I can do it justice reading the poetry. Heritage for Walter Leonard. The folk here are old. There are wheelchairs and people struggling to push them. There are sad-eyed people looking up from beds they cannot stretch out in. And some simply cannot move their heads. All will become something precious, sapphires, emeralds, rubies, which will be discovered by other explorers who will polish and shape the stones. And we will wear them, never knowing whose loved one we have embraced. Well, that was fast. That was Heritage. Second one is called Baby West. Baby West was my godmother. Died and left me $50 in her will. Where would I be without that $50? Mr. Gray drove not taxi, but private car, asked the white man he was taking to the airport if he could let his niece ride up front. He also dropped me at the train station. $10.50 for a ticket to Knoxville and $1 for peppermint. I posted a 45 RPM, but I don't remember which one. I spent the summer with grandmother and grandpapa, not realizing a man on a Latin school teacher's pension and a woman who occasionally cooked for white folk could hardly afford another mouth to feed. More hot water for baths, electricity for the radio, WGN until it signed off at midnight. I had no idea grandmother had to beg a white man to let me enroll in Austin High. Where I needed clothes, Millers and Rich's shoes, a coat and stuff, all I knew then was the sound of my father hitting my mother every Saturday night until I heard her say, "Gus, please don't hit me." And I knew my choice, leave or kill him. Both were sad. I am in the hospital. I am in the hospital room with yellow tulips from Nancy and Diana and a beautiful bouquet from the English department. I am trying to learn how to cry. It's not that my life has been a lie, but that I repressed my tears. We always teach the youngsters, don't cry, it will be all right. But crying cleanses. It will not be all right. But we will learn we can do nothing about it. I have seizures because I am thinking of my mother being hit by my father. It will not be all right. So I must learn to cry. The fly on the wall. I want to be the fly on the wall, about to fall down in your arms. I want to be the wonderful spider who sat down beside her, little Miss Muffet, that is. I want to be the girl you dream of when your dreams float you away. I want to be the fly on the wall, about to fall down in your arms. Last one I picked is called Black Lives Matters, not a hashtag. Oh, actually, that's not the last one, but next last one. Black Lives Matters, not a hashtag. I'm not ashamed of our history because I know there is more to come. I'm not ashamed of slavery, neither bought nor sold, because I know there is another answer. I'm not ashamed of dark or light skin, straight or curly or nappy, let's call it that, hair. I'm not ashamed of thick or thin lips, nor that time we waste singing and dancing. We taught the white folks to sing and dance too. I'm proud of Simon of Cyrene. Nobody made him help Jesus. He did his part. I'm proud of the woman who moaned on the ship at the 10th day for admitting, if not defeat, then certainly change. I'm proud of the rappers who rap, and most especially, I'm proud that Black Lives Matter. We do. We honestly do. The last one I chose is called Summer Storms. The clouds, like my grandmother, carry a load they can no longer support. Grandmother saying, "Pass me not, O gentle Savior." The clouds, though crackle, they're lightning and thunder. There are those who say we should run inside from the storm. But what would be like leaving grandmother at the kitchen table alone and sad as she thinks of her daughters and it rains? Well, here's another one. This is another good one. Even as a little girl, I loved to dust, especially light bulbs in the bathroom, and polish everything that was silver. Knives, forks, spoons, and all the little gigads grandmother was so proud of. I enjoyed ironing too. Grandpa's undershorts had to be creased, and since sheets were all flat, they could be folded and ironed. Now the touch was electric, so they can't be smooth, and you have to send them out, which could be too expensive. But actually, what I loved was the iron that would scorch the clothes. Irons aren't that hot anymore. Feathers don't remove the dust, and mostly, I miss my grandparents who took me in when I was lost. So, this book is a um, collection of poems about joy and peril, aging, the violence that permeated Nikki Giovanni's parents' marriage. Um, there's even an ode to Maya Angelou. I didn't read anything from that, but there's an ode to Maya Angelou in here, and it's a really good little book. Let's see, it is actually 112 pages, and so if you were really wanting to sit and ponder, you could read a poem a night, or you could read, two or three a night and just let them gestate, not a little bit differently from the way that we're experiencing them right now. But we're only going to be on here for an hour, so I can't talk about each one individually. But these are a few that I liked, and the book is called A Good Cry. If you're in need of one, then this is the book for you. A Good Cry, Nikki Giovanni. And now we are coming to a new author that I met recently on a training, on an online training class, and Dr. Ellen M. Ellers wrote this book, and it's called Dancing Along Needle's Thread. What a captivating book. I will admit that I'm not done reading.
Lost the sound.
Yeah, I
Hey,
don't
Leah,
have the
we've
sound
lost the
either.
sound. Oh.
I said I don't have the sound either. Actually, it has a slash through the microphone.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Yeah, from my end.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're back.
Yep.
Am I back?
Yep.
Yes, you're back.
Yes? No?
Yep.
Yes?
I can
Okay.
I can hear you. But we missed
Okay,
everything
so
about
I
Ellen.
was saying, and you probably didn't hear any of my conversation.
No, we
Oh.
didn't. No.
I was talking about Dr. Ellen Eller's wonderful book and how she's threaded through music and mythology and, gosh, even Alice in Wonderland. And how much I'm excited by it because I too am a study of the therapeutics of art. And so I picked several pieces to read from the book, one of which is the preface, because I wanted to give some sort of background, which Ellen does very well in her preface, of the concept and how she's threading the book through. So I'm going to start with the preface. Between two worlds, it reads, woman am I, spirit am I am the infinite in my soul. I have no beginning and I have no end. All this I am. The ability of the human mind to tap into other realms opens the door to infinite possibilities. That is on the page preceding the prelude, but I thought it was really a powerful piece. Dear reader, as I sit here in my apartment writing this introduction, my mind wanders back to my postgraduate years. During those years, I had this yearning to find and connect to that divine essence of the spark within my being. Exiting a 20-year marriage and entering unemployment, I felt myself walking out of darkness toward the light. Although the road was rocky and turbulent at times, I did not let fear deter me from my quest. It was the internal drive to know that fueled my passion to go on ever forward. Formal education provided the structure and through the arts, the freedom to find myself. There were many challenges, but I had the time of my life. My heart blossomed and I felt my soul revealed as a shining light for all to see. That is so powerful. Today, I find myself excited by the possibilities of reliving that journey, recreating the essence of self-discovery with renewed vigor so many years later. Using Hector Berlioz, I'm probably not saying it right, Hector Berlioz's 5-movement masterpiece, Fantastic Symphony, as my overriding structural framework, I originally wrote the stories as a symphony of my soul, the composition of which now forms the basis for this work. The Spanish word for sun, sol, is a symbol found in every culture since the beginning of time. Playing with the sound of the word, I have used it not only as a metaphor, but also as a symbol and guiding image for my soul. I realize not everyone will know Berlioz's work, so allow me to connect his symphonic story with my journey in this book. Berlioz's Fantastic Symphony is a brilliant musical expression. Oh, there she is. The person who was trying to join us is now, yay, she's here. Okay, Berlioz's Fantastic Symphony is a brilliant musical expression of his unrequited love for a beautiful woman whom he eventually married in real life, and it didn't go well. Isn't that terrible? He wanted us so badly that it didn't go well. This may seem like a strange choice to those familiar with this symphony, given its grim tone and direction. Although it is a story of dark obsession leading to tragedy, I did as I have done throughout my academic quest. I reimagined what I have learned and applied it to my own life in my own way. In this case, that meant ultimately turning the tale on its head and declaring, yes, we can pursue our passions and achieve meaning and happiness. In Berlioz's first movement, he recalls the passion that stirred in his heart when he first gazed upon his beloved. In my first movement, Journey into Mythology, I face my fears and follow my passion for stories, myths, and fairy tales, discovering untapped depths within myself. In Berlioz's second movement, his character has a chance encounter with his beloved at a dance during a major gala event. and feels the rush of hope. During my second movement, Journey into Literacy, I experienced the thrill of possibility as many surprises surface, and I unexpectedly encounter the male aspect of self. We each have male and female aspects in our psychological makeup and need to balance these two energies. In the third movement of Berlioz's work, his character hears a pastoral duet accompanied by the gentle sound of wind in the leaves. This combination of sounds inspires a vision for a bright future until a sudden sense of gloom comes over him when he wonders if his beloved is misleading him. As the sun goes down, he detects distant thunder and then ominous silence. In my third movement, the knowing body, I struggle with challenges and choices in my curriculum. But then, through the years, I have learned to tap into my body's knowing guidance for inspiration. In Berlioz's fourth movement, the composer's character finds himself in a feverish dream in which he is sentenced to death for having killed his beloved. Oh no. During the somber procession toward his execution, which is marked by screams, he reflects on his love. In my fourth movement, Theater as Family of Strings, I find myself in a semi-darkened classroom with like-minded women as we seek to discover our unique power. Disconnected from self, family, and society, we move in a circle to the beating sounds of our hearts, screaming as we discard our past selves, ultimately finding strength in our true voices. What an interesting imagery. You think about Berlioz's character about to shed all that he knows, all of that self, because he's about to be executed. And at least your circle of women don't have to die, at least not literally. In Berlioz's fifth movement, his character sees apparitions, sorcerers, and otherworldly creatures gathered for his funeral. Eerie and at times grotesque, this bizarre orgy is marked by sighs and shrieks of laughter. But then he sees his beloved return to participate in the mocking revelry. In my fifth movement, Life as Curriculum, I use my stories and all that I have learned to find my path as a teacher, aware that all existence is interrelated, mindful that many live in darkness, not always of their own making, and determined to help others find their paths. I am not the same person I was when I started my formal studies. Here in my apartment, looking out over the mountains, I am joined by Berlioz and then by Lewis Carroll, author of Alice in Wonderland, as a new dance takes place in my mind and my heart, and as these two characters come to life within these pages. Carroll, a product of the Victorian era, spoke about dream worlds to Alice, whereas Berlioz was a French romantic composer known for his fervent passion. I sense their presence today and am excited to give them voice through their fictionalized forms. Having them on this journey is a natural choice, as their traits are in alignment with my own personality. They inspired deep imagination in me while I pursued my academic ambitions. We will explore how the fullest experience of creativity and learning is found by reintegrating the meaningful aspects of our lives and by living and feeling our creations as they evolve. So just as these two artists were my companions during the days of writing my thesis, they join me once again as fond companions as I write this book, confirming and validating this next chapter of my journey. Carroll and Berlioz interrupt my writing. It has been our pleasure to accompany you on your path to self-knowledge. It was delightful to see you grow and blossom, they say in unison. Carroll continues, my dear, I am thrilled that you chose to follow your dreams. Just like Alice, you entered other worlds beyond the logical mind, the world of mythology. You did not let fear enter your heart. Instead, you thrived and accepted who you are. Thank you for including me again. Berlioz chimes in, and you discovered how passion fueled your internal drive to know. It propelled you forward. You did not look back. You did not let anything deter you from your goal, just as I followed my beloved for years, as captured throughout the 5 movements of my profoundly personal tale, Symphonie Fantastique. You honor me in weaving our story threads together. I nod in agreement and respond, I am delighted to have you two gentlemen with me again. for both of you have been an inspiration for my writing, allowing me to make use of my creativity, giving full rein to my imagination. I tell them that I must continue writing as we are nearing the end of the book. My experience of Saul has led me on a journey into some of the wonders and mysteries of life. It has unified my mind, my body, mind, and soul. My wonderland has been here on planet Earth while attending university. A door to another world is opened, giving me the freedom to engage in divine play as I peeled away the layers of self through the fine arts, expressive arts, and creative arts to reveal the essence of who I am. In this regard, I made use of Richard Wagner's, now forgive me, I'm going to try, Gesamtkunstwerk, probably horrible, a German word meaning a total work of art. I chose the direction as it was the only manner in which I could encompass the arts in its myriad forms, not a conventional approach to writing an autobiography. This book is the expression of a reimagined, and I'm not going to say it again, total work built on the ideas put forth in my thesis. I butchered it only once tonight. I take you, dear reader, to a dance of life as experienced in the totality of my university years. I make use of a variety of elements: my mother's story, my artwork, poetry, journal entries, letters, reflections, as well as characterizations of Berlioz and Carroll, to create a holistic experience which is threaded through my heart as I reflect on my life and look to the future. I learned that life is a brilliantly colored wheel of interconnected ideas, emotions, experiences, and artistic creations. Narratives are threaded together in a tapestry of personal meaning, even spanning across generations. It was a way to understand myself, my heart, and soul. This realization hit home and, in a sense, saved me. I allowed and trusted my heart, the captain of this ship, to be my guide on this journey in, through, and beyond time. For in the end, intuitive knowing was the golden key to unlocking the door to this wonderland called education. I carry my mother's stories in my heart. Her courage has been a guiding light on my own journey to self-discovery. Through circumstances beyond her control, my mother was not able to realize her dreams. It is my hope that she knows that I have carried that torch of light in the here and now. Our passion, two rays of light, have intertwined to form a single thread, passing through the eye of the golden needle to pierce the darkness, allowing the light soul to shine through. And an image of the sun flashes across the pages of my life, and I know that Saul is multidimensional and multifaceted. As I situate self in the center of my image, its circumference embraces me, subject and object merge. Smiling to myself, I lean back in my chair, ready to embark on yet another journey that awaits me. I had a dream in March 2019 and am following the signs to engage in a new and exciting adventure, to write this book, and in doing so honor the journey and learnings that have got me to where I am today, and to act on the fact that I am in charge of my life. And it is a fabulous book. Dancing along the needle's thread. It's just amazing how Dr. Ehlers has gone through and really taken that metaphor all the way through the book. There are, again, the technology is limiting, but there are illustrations and photographs and illustrations throughout the book. Very heartwarming parts of her mother's story, immigrating out of Germany during World War II into Canada. The whole family, really, not just her mother, but particularly focusing on the pain of that transition for a mom. As they moved from everything they know into something new, and completely unknown, and the fear of being, of moving is one thing, but moving under threat of your life is an entirely different story. And so poignant now with what is going on between Russia and Ukraine. So I urge you to buy this book. If you are interested in art, either the fine arts, the creative arts, or the expressive arts, or all of the above, it's certainly a book written for you. As I read through it, I wanted to be one of those speed readers so that I could actually take it all in before tonight. But alas, I read slowly. But finish it I will, and I encourage you all to pick up a copy of Dr. Ellen Eller's book, and we will have her on if she will be with us, and talk more in depth about it, and ask questions, and find out how and why she chose what she chose. But I think the preface was a really good way to get you into it, and my bad German notwithstanding. You'd never guess I took almost a semester of German. Anyway, that was many, many years ago. So the final book tonight, but certainly not the least of the books that I chose, is a new edition of Dr. Angela Davis's autobiography. It is simply titled An Autobiography. And it was originally written in the 1970s, and Dr. Davis was very young. It was right after she was freed from prison. And Toni Morrison talked her into writing an autobiography. And Toni Morrison was the editor of the original book. So to get us a little bit into it, I chose some part of her new introduction, and I just want to make sure. Okay, this is what I'm not going to read the entire introduction. The introduction is 24 pages. It is just the introduction to this edition, the third edition. There is also an introduction to the second edition and an introduction to the first edition. But if you do buy this book, I advise you to read the introductions. They are Angela Davis's reflections as she guides you into her story. So just the first page, actually, of her preface. At the time I wrote this book, I could not really imagine myself as an author, especially of an autobiography. Almost a half century later, I have retained my suspicion of the underlying individualism that defines the genre. Today, as we witness the perilous repercussions of neoliberal individualism, I am more convinced than ever that we need to engage in relentless critique of our centering of the individual. As was the case 50 years ago, I believe that if we fail to emphasize how our lives are precisely produced at the many junctions of the social and the individual, we fundamentally distort the ways we live and struggle in community with one another and with our non-human companions on this planet. Revisiting this text almost 50 years after I wrote it, I might call it something like Memoirs of a Life Dedicated to the Quest for Freedom. Or I could emphasize the subtitle of the first paperback edition, With My Mind on Freedom. I was indeed hesitant to write an autobiography then, but today I can say unequivocally that I am very glad that I undertook the challenge to write a collective story that, in light of the passage of time, may be more important than I then suspected. The significance I now perceive resides precisely in the many flows and ruptures of left anti-racist movements over the last decades. In this sense, I am eternally grateful to Toni Morrison, my editor at the time, who insisted on the importance of a political autobiography, and without whose assistance and persistence this book would not exist. As I dwell in the memories of this political past, I am reminded of how much I owe Toni, not only for this work and others she edited and wrote, but for her decades-long friendship and the many ways she transformed our planetary consciousness. And in many ways, that is really what Dr. Angela Davis's autobiography is about. I first read the first edition back in 2014 which may give some indication of my age in the timeline. But I knew it was an important story, and I read it, and I hate the word struggle. I really hate that word. And as I was about to be talking about this book today, I decided to do something that every writer and every reader should do. I decided to look up the word struggle. The reason I hated the word struggle is because I felt it embodied weakness and powerlessness, the pulling and pushing against something. But that is not the true meaning of the word at all. So I invite you to do what I did and look up the real meaning of struggle if you hate it the way that I do. I'm going to read from part 3, Waters, as she's titled it. It starts out September 16, 1963. After class, I asked the 3 or 4 students with whom I was walking to wait a moment while I bought a Herald Tribune. My attention divided between walking and listening to the conversation. Just skimming the paper, I saw a headline about 4 girls in a church bombing. At first, I was only vaguely aware of the words. Then it hit me. It came crashing down all around me. Birmingham, 16th Street Baptist Church. The names. I closed my eyes, squeezing my lids into wrinkles as if I could squeeze what I had just read out of my head. When I opened my eyes again, the words were still there. The names traced out in stark black print. Carol, I said. Cynthia. They killed them. My companions were looking at me with puzzled expressions. Unable to say anything more, I pointed to the article and gave the newspaper to an outstretched hand. I know them. They're my friends, I was spluttering. As if she were repeating lines she had rehearsed, one of them said, I'm sorry. It's too bad that it had to happen. Before she spoke, I was on the verge of pouring out all the feelings that had been unleashed in me by the news of the bomb that had ripped through 4 young black girls in my hometown. But the faces around me were closed. They knew nothing of racism, and the only way they knew how to relate to me at that moment was to console me as if friends had just been killed in a plane crash. What a terrible thing, one of them said. I left them abruptly, unwilling to let them have anything to do with my grief. I kept staring at the names. Carol Robertson, Cynthia Wesley, Addie Mae Collins, Denise McNair. Carol. Her family and my family had been close as long as I could remember. Carol, plump with long wavy braids and a sweet face, was one of my sister's best friends. She and Thanya were about the same age. They had played together, gone to dancing lessons together, attended little parties together. Carol's older sister and I had constantly had to deal with our younger sisters wanting to tag along when we went places with our friends. Mother told me later that when Mrs. Robertson heard that the church had been bombed, she called to ask Mother to drive her downtown to pick up Carol. She didn't find out, Mother said, until they saw pieces of her body scattered about. The Wesleys had been among the black people to move to the west side of Center Street. Our house was on 11th Court. Theirs was on 11th Avenue. From our back door to their back door was just a few hundred feet across a gravel driveway that cut the block in two. The Wesleys were childless, and from the way they played with us, it was obvious that they loved children. I remembered when Cynthia, just a few years old, first came to stay with the Wesleys. Cynthia's own family was large and suffered from the worst poverty. Cynthia would stay with the Wesleys for a while, then return to her family. This went on until the stretches of time she spent with the Wesleys grew longer and her stays at home grew shorter. Finally, with the approval of her family, the Wesleys officially adopted her. She was always immaculate. Her face had a freshly scrubbed look about it. Her dresses were always starched, and her little pocketbook always matched her newly shined shoes. When my sister Fania came into the house looking grubby and bedraggled, my mother would often ask her why she couldn't keep herself clean like Cynthia. She was a thin, very sensitive child, and even though I was 5 years older, I thought she had an understanding of things that was far more mature than mine. When she came to the house, she seemed to enjoy talking to my mother more than playing with Fania. Denise McNair, Addie Mae Collins. My mother had taught Denise when she was in first grade, and Addie Mae, although we didn't know her personally, could have been any black child in my neighborhood. When the lives of these 4 girls were so ruthlessly wiped out, my pain was deeply personal. But when the initial hurt and rage had subsided enough for me to think a little more clearly, I was struck by the objective significance of these murders. This act was not an aberration. It was not something sparked by a few extremists gone mad. On the contrary, it was logical, inevitable. The people who planted the bomb in the girls' restroom in the basement of 16th Street Baptist Church were not pathological, but rather the normal products of their surroundings. And it was this spectacular, violent event, the savage dismembering of 4 little girls, that had burst out of the daily, sometimes even dull, routine of racist oppression. No matter how much I talked, the people around me were simply incapable of grasping it. They could not understand why the whole society was guilty of this murder, why their beloved Kentucky was also to blame, why the whole ruling stratum in their country, by being guilty of racism, was also guilty of this murder. Those bomb-wielding racists, of course, did not plan specifically the deaths of Carol, Cynthia, Addie Mae, and Denise. They may not have even consciously taken into account the possibility of someone's death. They wanted to terrorize Birmingham's black population, which had been stirred out of its slumber into active involvement in the struggle for black liberation. They wanted to destroy this movement before it became too deeply rooted in our minds and our lives. This is what they wanted to do, and they didn't care if someone happened to get killed. It didn't matter to them one way or the other. The broken bodies of Cynthia, Carol, Addie Mae, and Denise were incidental to the main thing, which was precisely why the murders were even more abominable than if they had been deliberately planned. It is sadly relevant even today to be reading that passage. And the first time I read the book, it was very painful. I'd had to put it down several times. But I knew exactly which passages I wanted to share. And the final passage I want to share is one with a bit more, well, quite a bit more joy. It starts out June 4th, 1972. It was Sunday morning. We assumed we were at the beginning of an all-day wait and hadn't yet bothered to check in with one another. I had spent the night at Leo and Jerry's Moore Park apartment. Leo and I had gotten absorbed in our chronic debate about the weight of the mass movement in influencing the direction of the case. All of a sudden, Howard broke into the apartment out of breath. He had run all the way from his apartment on the other side of the complex. He simply told us that it was time to go. For an instant, I didn't even understand what time to go meant. The idea that the jury would reach a verdict on Sunday morning was so unlikely that I had not even bothered to get dressed. Without telling him, I had more or less accepted Howard's theory of the deliberations. The last moments were the most agonizing of all. We had been waiting for 2 days while the jury deliberated, for 3 months while the trial unfolded, for 22 months since the Marion County revolt, and now we were told that we had to wait until the press assembled before we could hear the pronouncement of the verdict. In that back room where we had waited so many times for court to convene, my lawyers kept reassuring me and themselves that there was no way the verdict could be anything but not guilty. Besides, with the shabbiness of the case and the mass movement pushing on, there was never any question of a guilty verdict. And in fact, we had never considered that as an alternative. It was either acquittal or hung jury. Now a hung jury could be ruled out. They had already announced that they had reached a verdict. There was, however, one possibility we were all reluctant to discuss. A compromise verdict, which, though theoretically illegal, happened all the time in jury trials where multiple charges had been lodged against defendants. But no one had said, at least not in my presence, the only thing we really have to worry about is an acquittal on the murder and kidnapping counts and a conviction on the conspiracy. Leo tried to cut away some of the tension by pointing out that we would know the moment the jury entered the courtroom. The expressions on their faces, especially Ms. Timothy's and Mr. DeLange's, would betray the decision they had reached. Of course, none of this helped very much. The suspense, the anxiety, all this was beyond remedy. I couldn't sit down for more than a minute without jumping up to pace off some of the strain. And when I began to pace, I had to sit down again, for the room was far too small to contain my energy. I could only clench my teeth and dig my fingernails deep into my palms. Margaret kept telling me that all we had to do was to keep cool for a few minutes more. Everything would soon be behind us. Kendra was fighting hard to keep herself together. When we went into the courtroom area, people were crowded into the corridor, but apparently members of the press still hadn't arrived, and we had to wait some more. Out in the corridor, Mother insisted that she wanted to wait outside while the verdict was announced. As I tried to calm her and reassure her that I would soon be free, my own strength and my own confidence began to return. Somewhere in the corridor crowd, a voice began to hum softly, a Negro spiritual. Someone else picked up the tune, adding the words, "Woke up this morning with my mind stayed on freedom." Before long, everyone, including my mother, had joined in. Captain Johnson, who had been the terror of both the press and the people attending the trial, walked out, looked around, and for the first time that anyone could remember, said nothing to object. At last, we took our places in the courtroom. Howard, Dobby, and Leo sat at the table, and I sat against the barrier with Margaret on one side and Kendra on the other. The bailiff announced the entrance of the judge. Within minutes, the jury began to walk through the door. At the sight of the first juror, Margaret, who had been the calmest of us all, let out a muffled "oh no" and slid down into her chair. I leaned over and gave her the same words of comfort she had given me. She sobbed softly. I looked at the jurors filing in, searching for reassuring signs in their faces. But they were all expressionless, as if they had purged themselves of every trace of emotion. I broke out in a sweat and felt my whole body go weak. There was not a hint of the usual warmth in Miss Timothy's face, which was cold and marble-like, and the sparkle in DeLange's eyes had turned into a dull stare directed at no one in particular. Like a fragment from a broken record, Leo's words roared through my brain. We'll know immediately what the verdict is from the expressions on their faces. During the judicial ritual preceding the reading of the verdict, I was searching for some explanation of the sudden transformation of the jury's posture. Their faces said conviction, guilty. But this was impossible, illogical, absurd. Unless the whole thing had been a grand hoax, unless they had consciously tried to delude us these last months, and these glacial stares were the reality behind the mask they had finally shed. I wanted to rush over and rescue my mother from the consequences. Born of desperation and incomprehension, these disjointed thoughts shook me so furiously that I had to strain to hear the clerk as he read the papers Miss Timothy had turned over to the court. The first count was murder. There was a loud, clear, not guilty. Heavy sobs fell into the moment of silence that followed. It was Franklin. It felt like everyone was breathing deep and hard and with the rhythm of a single being. The second count was kidnapping. Not guilty, rang out again. Franklin was crying louder. I did not think I could hold on much longer, but I had to hear the last verdict, the conspiracy count. My right hand tightened around Kendra's, the other around Margaret's. When the clerk read off "not guilty" for the third time, we screamed, laughed, cried, and embraced, completely oblivious to the banging of the judge's gavel. He wanted to close the trial with the same decorum with which he had presided. He read a rather long quote from 12 Men by G.K. Chesterton, congratulated defense, prosecution, and jury, dismissed the last from their duties, and declared case number 52613, People of California versus Angela Y. Davis, closed. In her joy, my mother looked so beautiful, she reminded me of the photographs of her when she was very young. I felt happier for her than for anyone else, including myself. The last thing I felt like was a press conference. I didn't feel like structuring my thoughts and emotions in order to articulate them before cameras and microphones. Yet it was the only way I could speak to and thank all the people. As we entered the press room, the members of the jury were just concluding their conference. Never having exchanged a word with any of them, I was now not sure how to relate to them. I stood at the door. The juror to leave the platform first was the one whom we had all thought was most sympathetic to the prosecution. I wondered what her reaction would be. When she approached, I extended one hand, but she reached out with both her arms, hugged me, and said, "I am so happy for you." All the other jurors followed her example. A crowd had assembled in front of the courthouse. As soon as they heard the verdict, people had rushed down to Civic Center. With the gag rule and the bail restrictions behind us, I could speak before a crowd for the first time in the 22 months since the revolt. I thanked them for coming, for all their support, and said that it was time to deploy our forces for the freedom of Rochelle, the San Quentin Six, and all other political prisoners. From the courthouse, we went over to Gloria and David's house, where my parents had been staying. Family, lawyers, friends, comrades, committee workers, and most of the jurors. We all sat in the sun on the grass in the backyard. I sank deep into the moment, husbanding this delight, hoarding it, for I knew it would be short-lived. Work, struggle, confrontation lay before us like a rock-strewn road. We would walk it. But first, the grass, the sun, and the people. Please, if you are confounded by the world today, as most of us are, read this book. It has so much history and yet so much relevant current affairs. Thank you so much for joining me on the premiere of Powher Books preview night. And I look forward to having some of you or all of you join me again next month when I will preview. I will just give you a treat to know that Isabel Allende has a new book called Violetta. I will be previewing that as my fiction choice. And I will be previewing one of Bell Hook's wonderful books called Art on My Mind. And I believe that I am going to be previewing a new poetry book by Suzanne Edison. This is the first she's hearing of it, but I will reach out to her to see if I can preview her book. And then I will find a memoir to preview as well. It might be one other Leslie graduate that I know who's releasing a memoir soon. So stay tuned. Join me back here next month, and hopefully you could hear me when you could hear me.
I managed.
Forgive all the technical difficulties and the poor German. Thank you so much, and have a really, really good evening.
Thanks, Leah.
Thank
too.
you.